Good morning, everybody. It's Jeff Goldberg for the Sales Pro Network. If you have not joined us before, I'm a sales coach and trainer. I work with both individuals and organizations internationally to help them do one thing and one thing only, increase their sales. And I founded the Sales Pro Network to elevate the profession of sales and to give you a place to hang out, talk to each other, network, learn and earn. And if you've been with us before, you know that every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, I either do a live training or the vast majority of the time, I do an interview with somebody who can add value to the profession of sales. And today is no exception, my friends. Before I introduce our guest, who you can see sitting there smiling at the screen, today is November 8th, 2024. There are, depending on how you figure it, 34 or 35 selling days left to the year. It's time to get busy. Plus, in about 3 weeks, it's going to be Thanksgiving, and you're going to start hearing "Call me after the holidays." So now, right now, this second is the time to get very busy. In fact, turn us off, go make some calls, call everybody who told you during the year that they're thinking it over, call everybody who gave you a maybe, and start prospecting your end off, because right now you're setting up your Q1. So stay busy, stay positive. Don't worry about politics. If you're happy about the election, if you're not happy about the election, doesn't make a difference. You still got to sell. You still got to eat. So go get them. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest. She is a business growth consultant. Say that 3 times fast. She's a sales trainer like me. She's an executive coach, and she's the president and founder of Raise Your Game. Please welcome April Jaffe. Good morning, April.
Good morning, Jeff. It's so great to be here. Thank you.
I'm very excited to speak with you, April, because you and I have a kind of a shared background in some ways, or at least you're very big on something that I enjoy, and we'll get to that in a few moments. But before we do, could you maybe give the audience a 2 to 3 minute version of your background?
Sure, 2 to 3 minutes. I will go for it. So I started out as an actress, singer, and went to the High School of Performing Arts, known as the Fame High School. And from there, as I was reaching for the stars, I fell into the advertising industry and felt at home there and became sales rep. And so it was really wonderful. You know, I spent a lot of time working with top advertising agencies and, you know, making presentations and building companies and launching companies from the ground up in the advertising industry. And then, you know, had an aha moment and decided that I would start my own consultancy. Instead of helping one company, I could help, you know, as many companies as wanted to work with me and individuals. And I could just, you know, open myself up to the rest of the world. And that's how Raise Your Game started. And, you know, my thoughts were, you know, many of us are great at what we do, but how can we even be even better? And so that was my goal, was to help elevate people. And because I personally didn't have any mentors that helped me, I really wanted to see how I could, you know, help people who really needed some direction and some motivation, and to learn how to be more effective at what they do.
Very cool. Now, going to the High School of Performing Arts, which I'm not sure if everybody caught it, but that's the one from the movie Fame. And it's not an easy school to get into, and you're pretty serious about your craft if you go there. And I'm assuming that you wanted to be a professional actor. What made you decide to go into advertising?
So it's such a great question. And a lot of you who are listening out there probably, you know, say, did I decide to do this, or did I just kind of fall into it? And so it was really just, you know, a moment in time where I was at a party and I was, you know, meeting somebody, and they were like, oh, I know somebody who has a music company. And so I said, oh, that sounds interesting, because I was in the music business as well. And I met them. And when they met me, they said, oh, you know, you would make a great rep. And I didn't even know what rep was. I was like, really? So I just said yes to it, which, you know, we're going to get more into later about how that can be really useful in our lives. And the rest was history. I just kind of, it was a really natural fit to be still in a creative environment. And, you know, I hit a point in my life where I just felt like I wanted to really have a career that I could depend on. And I really enjoyed the creativity in advertising and making music. I was doing, you know, music for commercials and jingles, and I got to sing and meet some really, you know, wonderful people. But what I really loved about it was that, you know, you created something and it went somewhere right away, which unfortunately, if we have any people out there that are filmmakers or, wannabe music makers, it's can be very consuming and you don't always have the opportunity to have your work reach people. So that was what happened. And then things just, evolved from there, where people asked me to launch companies and I became much more involved in business, which I never thought when I started my career that would be the case. So
And
that's
is that what got you into coaching and training? The fact that people just kept coming to you and say, "Give me some help."
Yeah, it was always kind of a natural thing that people did come to me. And, as we'll get into, I always seemed to be making it up. I mean, I really didn't know exactly what I was doing. Somebody put a tape in my hand and they were like, go. So, and from there, yes, somebody's just said, hey, I want you to start a company. So I really just naturally started, had to be responsible for sales, had to hire people, was producing, and I just kept growing and evolving. And so it just happened very organically.
Interesting. So I'm assuming it's because of your background in acting, but one of the techniques you use quite often to help people improve their skills in sales is improvisation. Can you just, for people who don't know what it is, just define what is improv?
Sure. So if you've never been to an improvisational show, two people get on stage and one person comes up with an idea. They throw that idea out to the other actor. The other actor has to listen to what they say, take it in, and then build off of what the other person says. And then together, they do a scene. They have a conversation, just like we do in life. That is improvisation.
So we're talking about like the TV show, Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Well, the TV show, they do a lot of like games. So there is improvisation in that, but very just pure improvisation can be just two people getting on stage and just creating a scene in the moment, which
And
is
often it's
more
like, somebody will say, they'll talk to the audience and they'll actually say, give us a topic or a place or something. And they just make it up off the top of their heads.
Right. And they might say rain. And then the person will be like, raining again, Sam, and then the other person will have to build off that.
Now, improv has certain principles that make it work. What are some of the principles of improv? Because it's not just get up there and make anything up, right?
You're absolutely right. Well, it's not necessarily not making anything right, but there are principles that we, base this work off of. And the first principle is yes-anding. So as I said, if a person gets on stage and says it's raining, the other person doesn't say, no, it's not. So yes, and is a really important principle. And then the second principle is, also being in the moment, being present. You have to be present and in the moment so that you can take what somebody is giving you. If your mind is somewhere else, then you're not going to be able to hear even what they said, which is the third principle, active listening. We have to actively listen. The other thing is that you have to be in acceptance of what is going on. The other thing you want to do is you want to be flexible. And you also want to play to your audience. So who's the person that's talking to you? You want to be able to play to them. So those are some of the principles that are used in improv.
Yeah, I think the most famous one that many people know is the yes and. And like you said, so, if one person says it's raining, the other person says, no, it's not, the improv is over. So
exactly.
it's how do we build on each other? How do we listen to what each other is doing and make something out of that? Yes?
Yes. And the other principle that is really important is make your partner look good. So that's a really interesting one. And some people will be like, well, what does that mean? But really, it's really about, it's not about you, and it's taking the focus of what's going on in a scene and really putting it on the other person. So that this way you're really building off of them instead of being in your own little world.
And I can see how, by what you just said, how that applies to sales. Because so many salespeople They'll start out with, thank you so much for your time today. Let me tell you why Jeff Goldberg and Associates is the greatest company in the world, blah, in which case I'm making myself the star of the show. But what you're suggesting is in improv, and I'm assuming in sales too, that we make the prospect the star of the show. Yes?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, absolutely. We have to make them the star of the show. We have to make them the center of, what's going on in this conversation so that they can really be felt, that they can trust us and be interested in what we have to say.
So how do improvisational acting techniques help salespeople be better at selling? It sounds related, but explain, please.
Sure. I mean, well, the first thing, right, we know that like when we start sales, a sales call, we have to be present and in the moment, right? So that's really important. We have to really connect with the person. I mean, that's, connection is the most important thing. So that's another thing that, parallels is we really need to connect. We have to actively listen. I mean, the first thing too is, somebody, when you meet them in the first few seconds, they're going to say something. If we're not really listening and we're so busy trying to, I got to make my presentation, we're definitely missing information about what could really help us in the sale. We're also really needing to tune in to where is this person coming from in this moment. They may be in a different moment than they were the first time you met them. They might be in a completely different place. So, we know that in sales is so key. And that's the same thing that we, really tap into in improv and really flex those muscles. We need to be adaptable because what we think and what the person is going to be sharing with us in that meeting can be very different. And so we need to be able to adapt. They might throw us a curveball. So we need to really be able to think on our feet. Improv helps us problem solve. So we may have a problem in our, interaction in our sales call, and we need to be able to figure out how we're going to solve the problem, and improv will help us do that. So I would say all of those things, are really important that we need in a sales call and that we practice. And it's, flexing these muscles and practicing that I think is so important when we're doing improv, that we can bring into our sales call by being really, perfected in what we're going to be doing, practiced.
And I know you and I spoke about it, when we first met, and I don't miss any opportunity to mention it. I also do stand-up comedy, and I did take an improv class once. And one of the things that I found is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there really has to be trust. You have to trust your partner that you're working with on the improv stage. And it's the same thing in sales, because if people don't trust us, they're not going to buy from us. Can you speak to that a little bit, about the trust factor?
Absolutely. Well, I think, by being real, and really connected to somebody, that immediately helps to build the trust. So, if somebody really feels like you're really present with them, and is really listening to what you have to say and is showing real care, that in and of itself is going to help build that trust with your client. So I think that's really key. And, connection is everything. And, one of the things, asking questions, right? We know that helps build trust. And there are activities that we do where we just ask questions back and forth and practice how that, will be in a sales call, and just practice that, flexing that muscle, which I think you and I both can say probably people don't ask enough questions, and they really want to just talk. And say why what they have is so great. But again, the questions really does help to, build trust with whomever you're speaking with.
Yeah, I want to come back to questions, because I do believe, like you do, the question asking is the true key to selling. Question asking and active listening, which you also mentioned before. But you said something else a moment ago that I want to come talk about. Because I know that one of the things you teach salespeople to do is to communicate authentically. Can you speak to that a bit? How do we normally communicate if it's not authentic, and how can we be more authentic in our communications?
Such a great question. And that word is used a lot, and people might be tired of hearing it, but I have to say authenticity, it's really being real. One of the bad descriptions of salespeople is, they're slick, or, they're bossy or pushy, and I think, you can still be confident in, what you're selling, and you can still be authoritative, but, being authentic is just, peeling back and being real and being in the moment. And sometimes it could be, even showing some vulnerability. People want to deal with people who are real, who they can relate to, who they feel that they have some kind of connection with. And so I think authenticity is really another way of saying, like, really be in the moment, be truthful, show honesty, show vulnerability, because I think that's really important. And we're building a relationship. That's really what it comes down to. And if you don't have authenticity in a relationship, then, it goes back to, you don't have trust and people don't feel safe. When you're really trying to create a safe space when you're in a sales call, because, people definitely are unsure about whatever it is that you're selling them, and do they really need it? And are you the person they should buy it from?
Yeah, we definitely want to make people feel safe. And, I often find that when I'm listening to people like talk on the phone, making cold calls or something like that. And speaking of cold calls, the cold call king himself, Peter Ekstrom, says, be assertive, not aggressive, right? 100%, Peter. Aggression is ugly, but we do need to be assertive in sales. But I find that quite often I'll be listening to somebody's call, and they'll get off with the prospect, and I'll go, who was that on the phone? And they'll tell me about the prospect. I'm like, no. Who was it on your side? Because that's not the person I talked to. What was with that voice you put on? Because I find people sometimes put on what I call their business voice.
I love it.
Like they act differently. Like you have to talk a certain way or be a certain way. And certainly as an actor on a stage, sometimes you do put on accents and voices and characteristics which are not you. But I suggest, you do need to be you. And I believe that's what you're saying about authenticity. Just be you. Look, if you're a wise guy who, uses foul language and talks about sex and religion all the time, that's probably not a great idea to be that authentic with your prospects, but just be you. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people want to, see somebody who's being real. And I think that that's, important. Absolutely. So authenticity, definitely.
In other words, you be you.
You be you. You be you.
That, to me, that's the only person I can be.
Great.
Now, I want to come back to something you said again a moment ago, which was question asking. I do believe that question asking is one of the three key characteristics that any great salesperson has. Great question asking, great listening skills, great storytelling skills. You teach people how to confidently ask the key questions that close deals. I think everybody listening wants to know that. How do we ask the key questions that close deals?
Well, that's a great question. I think the reality is that, when you ask enough questions, right? When you keep asking the right questions, then it will bring you to the question that you need to close the deal. So question asking, right, is about gathering all the information, but there's sort of like stages. So depending on where you are with the cycle, if you're meeting somebody for the first time, you're going to be asking certain questions that you need to ask because you just for the first time meeting them. One of the things I also like to do is ask, is it okay if I ask you some questions? I think that's a really important thing to do in the beginning of your sales call, because, I hear people sometimes saying, like, I don't want to ask too many questions because I don't want the person to feel like I'm interrogating them. So, I also want to say that it's not just asking questions, but how you ask the questions that's so important. So going back to that, which is, asking with real curiosity, asking from the heart, like you really want to know about what this person's needs, wants, and desires is. How will having what you have selling them change their lives? What will happen if they don't solve the problem that you hopefully are helping them solve? And what is the problems that they're having? Why is what's going on in their lives? What pain are they in? So I think there's just a whole series of questions that you really need to get to in order to close the deal. I think by the time, if you ask enough questions, you get to the end, it will be obvious what that question is. And it will be so much easier to ask because you will have built up this relationship by really showing that you're interested in them, and you'll really have a much better understanding. One of the things that I teach is I tell people, act as though you're like an FBI agent, and you're going in there and you just want to learn as much as you can so you can solve the problem.
But we don't want to interrogate. You're absolutely right. Much like the country, we don't have to agree on everything. And I am going to disagree with one thing that you said. I'll just give you my point of view. I would never, ever ask a prospect if I have permission to ask questions. Would it be okay if I asked some questions? To me, what that does is that puts them in a position of power. I'm elevating them and lowering myself. So I never want to do that. It's why I don't thank people for their time. I expect them to thank me for my time. But if I say, I don't think anybody who you would ever say, is it okay if I ask a few questions, is going to say no. But I've now kind of put you up here and me down here. And in my case, I can't imagine why anybody would trust me with the future sales of their company, or you, if I'm lowering myself. I'm a big fan of, if whatever you're doing is working, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, I say keep doing it. If it makes the seller feel more comfortable to ask permission and then receive it, I'm for that. Me personally, I just don't.
Well, everybody has the things, as you said, that work for them. And so I think, if you're out there and you're listening, if that's what I suggested sounds interesting to you, then, I would say explore it. I can get into a whole conversation with you about status, because in improv, we do teach about status. So just because you ask the person, do you mind if I ask you some questions, doesn't have to lower your status. You can make them feel like they're in high status for a few moments, and then you can switch it up and you can take it over again. So that's something that we actually work on as well, like how you change statuses, because sometimes the other person might need to feel like they're high status and they're running the show. But you know what? Ultimately, you know that you are running the show. And that's something else we work on, which is, you're directing this conversation. You're being really aware of yourself, which is another thing that we work on in improv, is you become more self-aware, but you're also learning how to direct the conversation to go exactly the way you want it to go.
Got it. Can you speak a little bit about status? Because I've never really thought about it, other than I don't want to raise them and lower them, but that's an interesting concept. So when you're working with salespeople, how do you incorporate that conversation
about status?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So like if you're in a scene, right, you work on these things where like, your high status or your low status. And so, if we were doing it like, really trying to show people how you flex that muscle, you might tell them like, okay, pretend you're a queen, or, you're the CEO, and somebody else would be practicing, being something like, they just started out as an intern. So, what does that feel like? And how does that feel when you change those statuses, and learning, how you can change that within a conversation. I think you're always kind of high status. You're always high status when you're a salesperson. So you're always running it, but you can make them feel like they are, which sometimes they need to feel.
Fascinating. Love that. I want to talk about the second trait that we both agreed is important: listening skills.
Oh, yeah.
Most salespeople, and I always say this is a technical sales training term, most salespeople suck at listening. They're horrible, horrible listeners, because we think we get paid to talk. You and I get paid to talk, but not when we're selling. When we're selling, we get paid to ask questions and listen. So it's definitely one of the traits that all top sellers have, and most salespeople don't. How does improv, excuse me, how does improv improve a salesperson ability to listen, and how does it improve their listening abilities and their observational abilities?
Great. That's a great question. So I just want to say that not only do salespeople suck at listening, but people in general are not good at listening. And that's just, everyone will say, when I'm in a workshop, I'll be like, who here interrupts people? And like everybody raises their hand. So it's really, to start with, it's like becoming aware that, you need to listen. So, that's the first thing. So when you're doing, we're working, whether I'm working one-on-one with somebody or whether I'm working in a group, we will do activities that actually, create an opportunity to practice listening. So we might do an exercise where you have to actually repeat exactly what the other person said before you can say what you want to say. So that's one, way of practicing it. Going back to improv in and of itself, if you just take that concept, you can't do a scene by yourself. So you really have to listen to what the other person is saying so that you can then have this scene. And that's something that, we have to emulate when we're doing what we do in a sales call. But, one of the reasons I love improv for sales and in a workshop is because it's like a gym. We get to practice, and I always say, actors, practice, artists practice, musicians practice, but where do, human beings get to practice being human in the world? And that's what I love about improv, is that we get to flex these muscles and practice before we get into the real life. So I hope that answers your question, Jeff.
It does. And not only did it answer my question, but it brought to mind that I got away from something I used to do in my trainings, a listening skills exercise, which I used to love. And I can't imagine now what, but I know I haven't done it in years, and I don't know why I got away from it. But I would, either have a whiteboard or a flip chart or something like that. And in very big letters, I'd write the word listen with 3 exclamation points. And then I would tell a story about a vacation that I took, and it's filled with details. And then at the end, it's like, okay, take out a piece of paper. I'm going to ask you 10 questions about it. And people generally, they aren't listening. And they weren't like hidden details. It was like, what island was I on? And what happened when I got to the boat? And I forgot my passport. I couldn't go on a cruise, blah, blah, blah. But it's that we're so intent on getting our next bit of brilliance out that we're not really listening to the other person. And in sales, I'm hoping you'll agree, that's deadly. It really doesn't matter much what we have to say, other than when it comes time to present. What really matters is, what does the prospect have to say?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's 2 things. One is, there is the 80-20 rule, so that, the prospect should be speaking 80% of the time and you should be speaking 20% of the time. But in addition to that, I mean, it's basically, if you're not really listening, then you're missing something that they are going to be saying to you that could be really crucial for, changing the course of your sale. My workshops, sometimes I do an entire workshop on listening. So every activity we do is actually strengthening. There's the listening, the skill of listening, and then there's the next step of listening. So there's a lot of different ways in which we listen. Do we listen to understand, or are we listening to just speak? And I'm going to encourage everybody who's out there listening today, I hope you're listening, to, when you leave this today, really try and listen extra closely and see how you can tell that you're not really listening. Which brings me to, how I came into using improv in my work was that, when I was working in the advertising industry, I started taking improv and I started noticing how in everything that I was doing, that I was getting much more effective. So when I was on the phone, I was really listening that extra. When I was in a presentation, I was really able to work off of my audience and connect with them and be spontaneous. And if somebody, asked a question, it didn't throw me. And I might, be a little more witty and creative. So there's just so many different things that by practicing, we can become more effective in, our work, in our sales work.
Yeah, I suggest that if you listened well, you should be able to paraphrase back to the prospect what they told you.
Exactly.
Because I like what you said before. Are you listening to understand? Are you listening to just waiting for them to stop so you can get your next bit of brilliance out, which is what I find most salespeople do. Pre-COVID, I used to go on sales calls with salespeople. I go into the field and just observe and coach. And can't tell you how many times I would sit there, holding back a scream because they would ask a question, the prospect would be answering, and you can see that they just couldn't wait to get their next question out, and they weren't even listening to the answers, because quite often when you listen actively to the prospect's answers, that will give you your next question. You don't even have to think about it. It'll lead you right to it. I'm going to give you a quick example because it's so good. I was with a salesperson one time. He worked for an insurance company. These were the actual providers of the insurance. So he's not selling insurance to you and me. They sell through brokers. So the key is, how do we get brokers to sell more of our insurance as opposed to others? So I'm on this sales call, and he did a good job of establishing rapport with the guy. And then he said, so whose insurance do you sell the most of? Which company do you sell the most? And the guy answered, Unum, UNUM. It's a big insurance company. And in my mind, I'm going, good question. What's his follow-up? And he went to a completely unrelated question, completely unrelated. And my promise used to be, when I would go out, to management, is like, I'm not going to interrupt. I'm just there to observe. I'm going to coach your person afterwards. But I actually broke my own rule. I said, excuse me a minute. I have a question. Why Unum? To me, that was just so obvious, but clearly this guy was not listening to what the other person was saying. He just wanted to get his next question out. And the answer that the broker gave us was, oh, why Unum? That's the guy who visits me the most often. He takes me out to lunch once a week. Now, that's pretty important information to know if you want to close deals. My belief is that if you ask the right questions and listen actively to the answers, your prospect will tell you everything you need to know in order to help them choose to do business with you. In fact, they close themselves. It's why I think what you said earlier was so brilliant. You'll lead right to the question that you need to ask. My belief is, closing is the natural outcome of the sales process done right. So if you do everything else, like listen, like ask questions, then it becomes easy and natural. And that doesn't mean you close everybody, but it shouldn't be a fight at the end. Yes, April?
I completely agree. And, you said something else, Jeff, that I think is really important around the questions part, that one of the things I also think is really important is that sometimes people jump from one question to the other. But one of the things I really like to work on is, how can you keep asking more questions on this topic? And so, I'll take scenarios that are not necessarily a sales scenario, but like somebody just, you're getting a roommate, and you want to really find out about that person, just to help flex that muscle. And how could you keep asking more questions on the same topic so that you find out things that you wouldn't necessarily find out if you didn't continue to delve on that topic and then jump to the other topic? But people don't realize that they could really find more questions if they just kept with it. And
it's like dating.
Yes.
It's like dating.
Just 100%.
While I don't love dating, I'm pretty good at going on a date because all I do is ask questions. Tell me about you. Tell me your story. I mean, and I think just like in sales, that works well because when you're interested in somebody else, you're more interesting to them. Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, said, it's better to be interested than interesting.
Yes. I will yes-anding you. Yes, and.
Perfect. Okay. Well, then let's and to something else. You wrote a blog titled Reset Your Happiness a while back. And with the election here in the U.S. this week, for those of you outside of the U.S., we had a presidential election this week, and it was rather wacky. Many people are ecstatic. Just as many people are in a state of complete despair. How can someone reset their happiness if they're one of those who are less thrilled with the outcome of the election that just happened Tuesday?
Well, I'm really happy you asked me that question because, I do really feel like mental well-being in sales, in life, is so important. And, that's where it really all has to begin, because how we go into a sales meeting, what attitude we bring in, how we're feeling, all of that really pours over. And one of the things that I think is really a great activity that you can do, I have like two things. One is you can just really, say to yourself, think about what makes you happy, and you can do an exercise where, I love going to the beach. I love sunsets. I love, dancing. What are the things that just get you fired up? And just, do that for 10 minutes and just see how many things you can, bring to mind. And that will shift your energy. Another activity that is really great for shifting is you can do a meditation where you just close your eyes and you think of a time that really, where you felt great, where, you were in that moment where like it was just so good to be alive. And you can just reflect back on that and just sit with that, and you can even give it a name. I recently did this activity and I was in Fire Island and I was on the beach with friends and the sun was setting and we were dancing and it was like just everything just felt so perfect. And when you just want to freeze that moment, and you might even feel like you were in a movie. I mean, anything, but it can be as simple as I was sitting on the bench and the sun was just beating down on me and it felt great, and I saw fun people. Anything that just brings you that good feeling, go back to it, sit with it. And that's my suggestion.
That's a perfect one. And if you saw me smiling, that's because I spent 10 years at Fire Island. It's where I met my wife, now ex-wife. And as soon as you mentioned it, I automatically had that picture of sitting on the beach with a bunch of friends and going out for cocktails and dancing and all the other stuff that we did for 10 years in a row every summer. Just fantastic. I would throw in, besides things that you enjoy and that make you happy, what you're grateful for. Because
that too,
as depressed as half the country is right now, there's still stuff to be grateful for.
Oh,
Focusing on that instead of, oh my God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is going to happen. There's not a heck of a lot that we can do about it at this point. We have to wait and see, but it's pretty much not worth our time just moaning. It's either take action or at least find a way to be okay with where you are, and we'll see what goes on. Yes?
yes. And, it brings me back to, I'm all about gratitude too. One of the things I'm also really passionate about teaching is perspective. So I think it's really important that, there's always going to be a duality. And so, we have to decide which lens we're going to look in. So to your point about gratitude, we can look at, all the bad things that are going on in the world, or we can look at all the good things, and we have to make that choice because it's for our well-being where we put that focus. So I think gratitude, as you mentioned, is incredibly important.
There's another area that you focus on, and that's the use of social networking to create brand awareness. What advice do you have for sellers around social network? I get a lot of business off of social media. What advice do you have about social networking?
Social network. Well, when you say network, can you explain to me what do you mean by networking with other people, or do you mean social media?
I don't know. I took it off your website.
I'm going to speak to social media networking. How's that?
Sounds good.
So, so two things. One is you can do networking, through social media, which I think can be really effective. So, I think, if you can meet people and have conversations with them on LinkedIn, that's really effective. And, one of the things that improv is really great for is teaching you how to network more effectively. So I really do believe in networking, and you can be in places that you wouldn't think that you are networking, but that you could be meeting people that you don't know by just being more aware of what's going on and just striking up conversations. So that's something that I really believe in, that you never know who you're going to meet, where you're going to meet them. And as far as, I would say social media goes, because we'll just talk about all things social. How's that, Jeff?
We can actually leave out the social media aspect. Do you have some tips for networking in general? Because to me, networking is one of the keys to being successful in sales.
Yes.
It beats the heck out of picking up the phone and cold calling, and I think that's important too. But
yes,
I get a third of my business from LinkedIn and another third of my business from the networking group I belong to for 20 years. So what tips do you have for networking in person or on social?
Yeah, I think, if I was going to go back to what we said at the beginning, I think it's important to, not make whatever you're doing just about you, that you're trying to see how you can have a mutually beneficial relationship with whomever you're trying to network with. And I think when you are at networking events, it's important to, not be a wallflower and stand in the corner. I know sometimes people don't like going to those things, but just being able to strike up a conversation with somebody, about something that is just, could even be, oh, you have on a great shirt, and then having that be a start of a conversation, and practice that. Like, don't be afraid to just strike up conversations, because people are there because they want to meet people. So I would say, and being all the things we discussed earlier, being authentic, asking questions, not making those conversations just about you, but, really taking an interest in the other person. And the other thing I'm going to say, this is really great, I'm so glad you asked me this, is follow through. One of the things I think people do is they meet people and then they don't follow through. So I'm going to say to everybody listening that, building a relationship, one conversation is not going to necessarily lead to anything. So I would suggest that you really follow through if you want to connect with somebody beyond one conversation, because that is going to make it worth your time. Otherwise, I think meeting somebody once is a waste of your time.
Yeah, it's from the relationship that you build, and
Yeah.
just like in selling, you have to develop a relationship of trust. I'm not going to refer business to anybody that I don't deeply trust, because who am I going to introduce them to? I'm going to introduce them to my prospects and my clients, and that's how I feed my family. So I'm pretty caught. I'm happy to give referrals all day long, as I know you, like you, and trust you. To borrow a phrase from BNI, a large networking organization all over the world, in case somebody's not aware. But yeah, you've got to invest the time to really be interested in somebody else and learn about them. And I love what you said about, just go talk to people. If you go to an event, you're right. Some people go and they kind of force themselves, and you can always see they're kind of standing off alone. I always suggest, put a smile on your face, walk to everybody wears a name tag at these things, which makes life easy. If I didn't know you, I could just walk over and go, "Hi, April, my name is Jeff. How you doing tonight?" And you'll go, "Terrific." And I'll go, "I'm just curious, what do you do for a living?" Or tell me about yourself. Make again, let the other person be the star of the show. And I do that for two reasons. One is I want to know, because if I know more about you, I could possibly learn to trust you and maybe refer you business. But the other thing is, when you explain to me what you do for a living, I would bet that when you finish, you're going to go, "And Jeff, what do you do for a living?" And I'm pretty damn well prepared to explain exactly what I do, just in case you know somebody who might need me. Yes?
Yes. And I would say have fun. I think that's the key. I mean, one of the things that I really did in my career early on was that, I always made everything a game, which is part of why I named my company Raise Your Game. It's like, make it fun, just have a good time with it, be light, don't be heavy about it, allow yourself to be surprised. You may find that you meet somebody that you would never have anticipated meeting, and that you can really enjoy yourself, which is really what, it should all be about, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, not only somebody you didn't anticipate meeting, but I'll throw in, don't prejudge. I learned how to network from a woman named Ellen Volpe, who's a dear friend of mine. She brought networking to Long Island 37 years ago. The group I belong to is 37 years old, and there are two people in the group that've been in the group 37 years.
That's great.
She's incredible. And, we've become friends, and we sometimes will go to a trade show together. And I can remember one where we're walking, and she looked at a trade show booth and she goes, "You should network with that guy." And I looked at what he did, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I have no idea how I could possibly ever refer him, or he could refer me. But she's got this sixth sense. You never know. It's also my dating philosophy. You never know.
Yeah,
Sales and dating, I think, are kind of very closely combined. Does she like me? Does she like me enough to go out with me again? Does she like me enough to close the deal? But it's you got to be interested. You really do never know. Same thing with selling. I find that sometimes the deal that you absolutely think it's 100% coming through falls apart. And the ones that you think weren't going to come through, they do. You just never know. So yeah, be open. You also talk about adaptability and thinking about on your feet, which clearly is important in sales, because we never know what the prospect's going to say. Improv helps you practice this skill, yes? And if the answer is yes, which I think, how so?
Well, I mean, when you're in you're in a scene, you don't know what the other person is going to say. So, suddenly they might say, like, "Okay, well, we're in Russia." You have to say yes. But, really, when I do workshops, try to keep it more to things that we can actually, relate to. So we do some role playing activities. And again, you don't know what the other person is going to say. So you have to adapt to what they say and kind of go along with it. If we do a storytelling activity, which we do often, you don't know what the next line is going to be that somebody's going to say. So you have to then adapt to what they say and take the story somewhere else. Similar to what happens when we're in a sales call. You start the story one place, your prospect brings it somewhere else. You better adapt and think on your feet, or that conversation is over, and so is the sales.
Yep. And as soon as you said we're in Russia, my mind went, "Da, comrade. And how was your breakfast today?" I think that was a pretty crappy Russian accent, but okay. But that's where my mind went, anyways.
And that's good. And that's fun, and just something like that, learning to, you have that creativity, but that's something that we really want to enlighten people with, and spark that muscle, because not everybody has had that opportunity to practice that, and it's really important in sales that we are able to be creative.
Yeah, I find that on the comedy stage, which is not the same as improv, but sometimes it is, the funniest moments often come from the audience member says something or something pops. Because one of the things I didn't realize before I went into comedy was that most comedians do not get on stage and just wing it. They pretty much know what they've got what's called a set.
Yeah.
They've got 7 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour, and they know pretty much what they're going to say. But I know that I do. I rehearse before I go up, because you want to stick to your time. You don't want to be up there just rambling like an idiot. At least I don't. But sometimes something comes to you right in the middle. It's like, oh, this is perfect. Or the audience, you'll see somebody and they look a certain way. It's just, I love those moments.
Well, you know what? And I'm going to interrupt you, which I shouldn't, but because you just said what you said. And that is the same thing that we want to parallel when you're going into a sales call, that you want to really look at your prospect and what are they doing? What are they saying? What are they throwing out at you that you didn't anticipate? And how can you use that to your benefit in that meeting? So I wanted to just tie that in there, because
that's great. And not only does it work on a sales call, but improv training also impacts sales teams. Yes. I mean, how does an improv training impact both teamwork and maybe communication within a sales team?
Great question. So, I also want to just specify that, when I teach, I'm also teaching not just like a straight improv class, but I'm basically using methodologies of sales and incorporating that in, so that you kind of getting the best of both worlds. So what I do in a team, what I think about teamwork is that we take on an ensemble mind. So an improvisation group has to work as a group. A sales team has to learn how it's not just every man for himself, but that if one person succeeds, we all succeed. So, we will do activities where everybody collaborates and they learn how to collaborate together for the outcome of the group. And so we work on teamwork and how, that's going to be effective. And I think in sales, teamwork is incredibly important. And, in a working environment, it's incredibly important. So does that answer your question, Jeff?
Yes, it does. And it brings up another question. There's a couple of words that are consistently used, and I'm not sure that everybody, completely understands the definitions, but those two words, empathy, which we hear about all the time,
yes.
and EI, emotional intelligence,
yes.
we hear about all the time. Are there any effects or lasting effects that improv has on empathy and emotional intelligence in sales interactions?
Oh, totally. And, I appreciate that you brought that up, because that's another thing that I do bring into my work is like, I really work on emotional intelligence and how we can increase that. And improvisation does help you because, when you are listening, it works on your empathy. You have to kind of feel, what is it like to walk in somebody else's shoes? So, I really do a lot of work on that, and learning, self-awareness is really what emotional intelligence is all about. So the more aware we are of ourselves, which improv really helps us become more aware, the more intelligent we become. And the more self-aware we become, the more aware we become of others. And that's something that takes work. And a lot of people are on automatic pilot, which is another thing that I think is really important to mention. While we're learning this work, and when I work with people, I really try to teach them about, how to be more deliberate about the way they're going about their lives and a way that they're going about their sales calls. And, it all interacts with each other. I think of us as people like this is my instrument, and how am I working on it so that I can be the most effective? And that is a holistic approach. Mind, body, brain, spirit.
Gotcha. I don't know if anybody else is interested, but I'm certainly curious. Can you give us an example maybe of one of the activities that you do with the sales team?
Sure. Well, I'll talk about the first concept, which is yes anding, and where I think yes and is so important. So I'm going to tell everybody today, instead of saying no today, I want you to say yes and then add what you want to say. So we would do an activity. We would start with something like maybe the two of us going on a vacation, and we would just go back and forth and add information to where we want to go and what we want to do. And we would just start to flex that yes and, because when you are in a sales call, somebody might say something to you and you might want to say no. And when we say no, like, oh, can I, get this or get that? And you say no, that really stops the conversation. It doesn't make the other person feel really good. In improv, we call it blocking. But, if you say, and I'm being very literal right now, but as an exercise, we say yes and would mean like, I hear what you're saying, and then you would add what you would want to say. So that's one of the activities. So that's just to get us going.
So if I said, hey, April, want to go to St. Martin this weekend? You wouldn't go, no.
Exactly. I would say,
that stops the conversation. Unless, of course, you didn't want to go.
Exactly. Or if, let's say I didn't want to go, I might say, yes, that's a great place. And I hear that Puerto Rico is having an amazing sale on flights, so I could do it that way. So that's like,
So you're still continuing the conversation without
exactly.
negating me. It's always yes and. Got it. I see we're running out of time, and I've got more questions.
No.
Yeah, I know. This happens to me every week because I talk to fascinating people. Here's something else that we all have a little voice that's constantly talking to us. And I always say that if you don't know what little voice Jeff is talking about, it's the little voice that just said, what little voice is Jeff talking about? It's self-talk. You call it our inner voice. Why is self-talk a key factor in creating the outcomes in our lives? Why is self-talk so often negative? Why do we constantly telling ourselves we're wrong, we're stupid, we're fat, we're broke? And what can we do to have our self-talk be more positive?
Oh, well, Jeff, we could speak a whole hour on this, and maybe it will be part 2. But
yes, and
yes, and the short answer is that it is in human nature to be critical, and we all have this judge in ourselves. The first step is to notice it, and to notice like, oh, and tell yourself, that isn't really helpful, and really switch over to the voice in your head that's positive, and is supportive of what you want to do and accomplish. It's, I would say that, a lot of my executive coaching, like unanimously, everybody sort of has this inner critic is another way of looking at it. And, step 1 is becoming really aware of it. And step 2 is really trying to make that other voice louder. And that would be the short answer, that's what's really important, becoming aware of it, and then just switching over to the voice that's really supporting you, and changing that dialogue, really saying, this is not really helping me. And when you go into, you're about to go into a sales meeting, I believe in preparation, doing a really important preparation emotionally, mentally, physically, before you step into that room, before you have a conversation. And that would start with, really hyping yourself up about how great and wonderful you are and how you're going to close that deal and how you're going to have a good time and how you're going to really listen and be authentic.
Yeah, it's great. With my private coaching clients, I work on certainly skills and tools and tips and techniques, but that's about 50%. The other 50% is what I call the mind game of selling. And I talk a lot about that little voice. And one of the things that I think is important is when you catch yourself, which most of us don't because we're not paying attention to even our own conversation. But when you catch yourself, you have to be gentle.
Yes.
If your conversation is, "Oh, you're such an idiot," it's like, "No, oh yeah, that's stupid." Well, that's just more of that inner conversation. It's like, "Oh, I just noticed I call myself stupid. I'm not stupid. I might have acted foolishly in this instance, but I'm actually very smart. I like to reframe it." But you have to be gentle with yourself, because if you use it to beat yourself up, it's just going to give you more of the same. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, there's a whole theory right now, there's a study, it's called, positive intelligence, and they break it down. And, another simple way to look at it is that, like, that voice is a saboteur. It's not your friend. So, try and recognize it and don't identify it with being you. Just it's that voice. It's not you. It's just this voice. And it starts out as we do it. And the other thing that I think is important to look at is why, what is that? Where is it coming from? So often that voice is somewhere along the way was trying to protect you, understand, like, what is that voice representing for you? What did it represent at one point in your life? And is that still really useful to you? No, it's not.
Got it. Thank you. Well, we're actually out of time, but before we do, Pete Ekstrom asked, "How does April earn her living?" So if you would explain that, I'm going to share my screen, and you can also let people know how to get in touch with you.
Well, thank you for asking. So I am an executive coach. So I have a coaching practice. So that's how I make my living. And I facilitate workshops for sales teams. And that's the other way that I earn my living. And I also do consulting for businesses that are, starting out and need help in all different areas of sales and marketing.
And how does somebody reach you? The people who are watching live can see this, but for those who are going to be listening on a podcast in a couple of weeks, how do people reach you if they're interested in speaking with you or learning more about what you do?
You can reach me by emailing me at April@raise, RAISE, your, YOUR, game.me. And you can find me at April Jaffe on LinkedIn and reach out to me. And you can Google me. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Jeff, it has been a pleasure to be here with you. And I think we could probably talk for another hour. You seem to really connect with the work that I'm doing, and I appreciate you and you sharing your gifts with the world.
Oh, thank you so much. Would you like to give out your phone number for those who will be listening?
Sure. And my phone number is 917-969-2657. I look forward to hearing from you. And thanks again, Jeff.
April, thank you for sharing your brilliance so generously today. I appreciate it. And I will end as I always do. Gang, please remember that sales is a game of making things happen. Get out there and make sales happen. Have a great weekend, April. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you next week.
Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great week.